there are a ton of underemployed race car drivers who call themselves coaches who are not professional coaches. Like if you said to them, what do you do for a living? They'd go, I'm a race car driver. But I go, well, how do you make your living? Well, I get paid to coach. There are some instructors / coaches out there who have uttered the phrase OSB.
Other sports Beckett.
I think that is the most rude, stupid, ignorant thing that anybody could ever think, because there is not a person in the world who cannot improve as a driver. I'm not going to say that I can take every driver and turn them into Max Verstappen, but I can make every driver improve.
Okay, welcome to It's Not the Car. We are a podcast about racing and the choices people make. Sometimes those choices are made in a race car, sometimes not. I'm Sam Smith. I am a journalist and a club racer, and I used to be executive editor at Road and Track, which was a weird job in 1,000 ways. And if you want to know how weird, well, once Sebastian Vettel and Christian Horner came into my office on a weekday morning, and they both looked lightly hungover, and that was just like only the second strangest day that week. The first strangest day is a whole show in itself, and I will get to that later. But in the meantime, Ross, how are you?
I am good. I have never had Christian Horner and Sebastian Vettel walk into my office. First of all, I don't really have a real office, but and
I've been to the hut in your backyard. It's a very nice office hut.
The hut. I'm going to start calling it the hut. Yeah. But when I'm not hanging out with Sebastian Vettel and Christian Horner, I'm a driver coach, and a lot of times now I spend my coaching time in a hut, because I look at squiggly lines on a screen and go, hey, driver, do something different.
Well, just to be clear, those guys had no clue who I was and couldn't have cared less, but I do get to say they were in my office.
Were they looking for more Red Bull?
Maybe. The line was apparently that Vettel had been to a Rolling Stones show the night before and stayed out until 3 or 4 or whatever in the morning, and it was probably 8:30 when they showed up. Dude looked, he looked like Seb, but he also looked like he had been hit by a very large kind of Mick Jagger-shaped truck. Which brings me to our third point, which is not at all related, which is that Jeff, our third co-host, is not here today. But that's good because, frankly, we're taping this a few days after I saw him at VIR, where I sat on the pit box all weekend and watched him run an IMSA race team like a Swiss watch. And let me tell you, we miss Jeff, but that weekend just reminded me that he's way too smart and talented and good looking to hang around too much. It makes all of us look like the garbage people we really are.
Sam, you just said Jeff is not here, and that's good.
Yeah, because it makes me feel better about myself. Because it's all about me, Ross. It's all about me and my emotions. I run nothing but my own head. No, we miss Jeff. He will be back probably next show. We think. We're not sure.
Who knows?
Who knows? So today's show format is a fresh one. We used it a couple episodes ago for the first time. That was with Jeff, and I loved it, and I'm selfish, so we're doing it again now with Ross. We call this format My Life With. And, because it's a format, we can say My Life With blank, right? With Ross, no, you're Ross. With Jeff, the topic was shocks. But with this, the topic is something broader. My Life With, as a format, it's about the really important, big kind of landmark moments in how we all learn and get better, how those landmarks fit into the larger learning curve with a subject, right? Because this show is the show, we're focused on what it takes to wrap your head and body and emotional, squishy, gutsy core around the things that happen in a car, on a racetrack, at speed, and how we all come to kind of understand the core bits of that equation as we get older, as we try to stink less, maybe day after day. How we learn and how our understanding of all the concepts that make us who we are in a race car changes over time. So the person at the core of this, in this case, it's Ross. Last time it was Jeff. That person tells how they came to understand that whatever concept we've picked with stories. And that object or concept could be anything. Could be a way of thinking or acting or a part of a car or something that happens every time you go to a racetrack. The brats at Road America. I don't know. One day we'll do an entire show on tube meat. Ross, can I do a show on tube meat?
Yes.
Tube meat. And with Ross today, the subject is coaching. Now, the cool thing is Ross is a performance and racing coach. And those two things are, it's worth noting, they're very similar, but also very different. A lot of current drivers, pro drivers, are coaches, for example. And Ross used to be a pro driver. He drove IndyCar, drove sports cars, won a championship. But what he does is a little different than just what you see typically out of a coach, right? It's not as simple as brake 5 feet later, roll into the corner here, pick up more throttle there. It's the mental game, the mental side of this. And ever since he reoriented from being a driver to a professional coach, ever since he wrote best-selling books on the subject, since he rose into coaching Indy winners, Le Mans winners, and Ken Block, and countless other people at the absolute peak of the sport, Ross, cover your ears again. Cover your ears. Cover your ears.
You're covered.
Okay, you're going to get a big head if you hear this, so don't hear this. I can say this, but the thing is, Ross is one of the best in the world at what he does. And part of that, a large part of that, hangs on the fact that he thinks about how we get better. Okay, uncover your ears. Are you back? Okay, cool. It's like talking to my children. It's amazing. I get to talk to Ross Bentley like he's my kid.
But I still have these head things on these ear things on my ears.
It's a figure of speech. You're supposed to just turn the volume off and then stare out the window like, I don't know, like a cat. So, All right, Ross, tell me things. How did you start doing this? Every driver ends up as a coach for a reason. What was yours?
Perhaps. Well, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how to answer that, because on one hand, I don't know why, but ever since I was a little kid, maybe because little kids think this way, is I wanted to be the best in the world. And because I wanted to be a race car driver, I wanted to be the best race car driver in the world. I wanted to win a Formula One World Championship. I wanted to win Le Mans. I wanted to win the Indy 500. I wanted to win NASCAR. That was my dream, right? I wanted to be the best in the world. I didn't do that. I didn't do that as a driver. So when I became a coach, which, we could spend time on, how much time we've got, we could spend time talking about instructing versus coaching. But when I became a coach, I was like, okay, I want to be the best coach in the world. I haven't gotten there, but I still want to be the best coach in the world. So I think probably at the core, that's what's driven me, is like, okay, here's something that I have an opportunity that I can work at being the best at. And I don't know why. Blame my parents or my environment or something, but that's what I wanted to do.
You told me once that you played tennis and basketball in high school, and that there were a couple of moments where you were kind of forced to think about getting better and what that's tied to. What was that like? Why and how?
So I think, we'd learn a lot from our role models, right? Our mentors, whether they're designated as a mentor or not. And basketball, when I was in grade 11, we had the starting lineup on our high school basketball team. Our center was 6'11". Our forwards were 6'9" and 6'10", I think.
I'm sorry, he was almost 7 feet tall. Are you serious?
Yeah, in high school. Our guards were like 6'4" and 6'3" or something like that. We were the biggest. So we're, the outskirts of Vancouver, British Columbia. So we're playing in provincial championship. I think we finished second when we were in grade 11 in the provincial championship, sort of like a state championship thing.
Was it because 7 foot tall guy just walked up to the basket and just went boonk, and just put
kind
it
of
in? Like, oh.
Yeah. But here's my big takeaway from this is, we had two coaches, the coach and the assistant coach, and the strategy that year was just overpower people with height. The next year, all of those kids, they graduated. Now, the next year, our center was 6'1". Our forwards were 6 feet tall. Our guards were like 5'8" and 5'10" kind of thing. And, I'm in there as a guard, and, we were like the tiniest team in the province. And our coaches, I remember the very first practice, to this day, I can remember them walking into the gym and going, we're no longer the biggest team in the province. We're the smallest. We have to outwork them. We are going to outwork every other team. The practices became 3-hour marathons where practically every practice players were barfing on the court because they worked us so hard. We just run and run and run and run. And we'd start a game and we would full court press the entire time. And we just outworked every other team and we won. And to me, that was sort of it was a good learning moment about coaching of how does a coach look at strengths and weaknesses and go, okay, we had this strength before, we don't have it now. How are we going to work around that? And that was important to me.
What was it like when the coach came to you and like what went through your head when he said, "We're just going to work harder than everybody else"? Like how much of you was like, what if we don't? What if we just get the tall guys back?
Well, my way of thinking was, yes, finally something for us little guys. So it was an opportunity.
Really interesting. Yeah,
it was an opportunity. And when I played basketball, I was not a great basketball player, but to me, the most fun thing on a basketball court was always stealing the ball. I was that little guy that was quick on their feet, and I'd run around. And like to me, stealing a ball was like dunking the ball in scoring that way. Like to me, that was a big deal. So outworking people, working defense, and just driving other teams into the court, into the floor. I love that idea, and I got to say, some of that, then because I started playing tennis pretty seriously then as well, a lot of that same kind of approach went into my tennis game. I was gonna outwork everybody, and the coaches, I had 2 coaches, and one in high school, and then a tennis club that I played at, and I think they recognized sort of the scrappiness in me. And so I don't know why, but I can remember thinking, I noticed the way they coached. And
really? What did you see?
Well, I noticed how they adapted, and they adapted to the player. They coached me differently than they would coach another player. And years later and years ago now, I remember reading Phil Jackson's book, Sacred Hoops, about when Phil Jackson was coaching the Chicago Bulls back in the Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman, I can't remember the other guys. And one of the things that he talked about in there was like first practice of the season, he gave each player a book to read. And a lot of them because of Phil Jackson, the way he thought, I can't remember, but Michael Jordan might have got a book on Zen, the Zen approach to something. Scottie Pippen might have got something about philosophy. Dennis Rodman might have got something, I don't know, about tattoos or something. But he adapted his coaching to each one of those players. And I looked at Phil Jackson. He's another guy that I kind of look up to as a great coach, and go, Phil Jackson, imagine him going one-on-one with Michael Jordan or Scottie Pippen or Dennis Rodman. He would have got his butt kicked, right? Even when he was at the best of his game as a player. But as a coach, he was amazing. One of the greatest coaches, I think, in any sport. And a lot of it is because of the way he adapted his coaching to the players. And it's something that I have taken to, people have asked me as a driver coach, what's your process? What's your system? What's the way you look at coaching people? And I go, whatever it takes. That's my process. If I'm coaching you, Sam, it would be different than of coaching Jeff, or Sebastian Vettel.
I mean, yeah, the difference is both of those 2 guys are very, very good. But okay, so let's back up a little. So fast forward from Ross playing tennis and basketball into kind of not that I don't want to say the tail of your pro career, but every pro driver's career has a point where they realize that things are tapering, right? And things are winding down. That happens at Formula One. That happens at the absolute bottom level where you're only getting paid in the ability to drive the car, and everywhere in between. So by the time you got to that point, you had worked with coaches before, you had seen coaches all over the paddock before, obviously. and you had been coached. What was that transition like, and how did it change how you thought about it? And did you set out to did you initially set out to work as hard as you could, or was it just okay, you're going to do this next, and this is just apply the same mentality?
Well, two things there, I think. One is there weren't a lot of coaches back then. Like, I'm going to say there were, honestly, like there were probably 3 or 4 people who I would consider coaches at that time.
Really?
And people like Michael Zemicki and Peter Krause and a few other people that were kind of doing this as a job, as a profession. So there were not that many. I'm going to say the number of the real professional coaches has grown more, but not as much as you would think. There are a ton of underemployed race car drivers who call themselves coaches who are not professional coaches. That's not their, like, if you said to them, what do you do for a living? They'd go, I'm a race car driver. But I go, well, how do you make your living? Well, I get paid to coach.
So when you made that transition for one reason or the other, you got into it thinking this was a viable next step that you wanted to go into, or you went into it because it was, forgive me for saying so, the logical next step?
So I never really thought about it as, okay, my driving career is ending, I got to go and do this.
Right.
Because I'd actually started much earlier. The very first thing I did, I guess realistically, in a race car was I went to the Jim Russell Racing School at Willow Springs way, 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 way back in time. And when I finished the school, the chief instructor came to me and said, how would you like a job instructing here? And I can remember thinking, oh, wouldn't that be interesting? That would be pretty cool, because I'd also coached tennis. That was something I'd been doing to kind of spend more time on the court as well. And I enjoyed coaching tennis. I enjoyed that idea of helping somebody else get the same enjoyment from the sport that I was getting. So when this guy asked me, do you want to stay and become an instructor here? I remember spending a little time thinking about this, going, the school is over. Should I get in my car and drive back to Vancouver? Or should I call my parents and say, I'm not coming home? And then one of the other instructors came over and said, hey, come here. He said, hey, if you really want to race, don't get stuck being an instructor here, because literally you will get stuck doing that. You will become an instructor and you won't be a race driver. And I went, I got to race. I'm going home. So that planted the seed though with me that, oh, I could do that. And I'm going to say a year or two later, my local club where I raced at the Westwood Racetrack outside of Vancouver, the Sports Car Club of BC, every year, twice a year, they would do this driver training program to get people licensed to go racing. And I volunteered to be an instructor there, and then got more and more involved in that. So I realized that there is nothing in the world that I love more than driving a race car. But I'm one of those very fortunate people in the world who I have something else that I love just as much. I love the teaching, instructing, coaching part of it as well. And so I just started doing more of that because, hey, the life of a highly paid professional race car driver, you never quite know where your next check is going to come from, or if it is. So most drivers have something on the side. And that was my something on the side. And then it just kind of gradually grew and grew and grew. And, there's sort of this graph where, one's going up and then one's going down and one's going up and one's going down and one's going up. And, there was a point where there was a point where I was getting paid well to drive race cars, and I was getting paid well to coach. And I got to say, that's when I really, really started to understand what coaching was all about. And so there was never hey, I'm over the hill, done my career as a professional race driver. I better find a job. Oh, I could get a job as a coach. they just kind of transitioned. And if you said, when did I become a coach? I don't know the answer to that question. But there were times in that period of time where I'd be at the track and somebody would say, what are you racing this weekend? And I go, I'm coaching this weekend. And they go, that's too bad. And I go, no, it's not. And so I realized that to me, a coach was just as good as being a driver.
So you talked about from an early age wanting to be the best in a car in the cockpit, right? And then realizing that wasn't going to happen, that didn't happen, vectoring that into being the best coach in the world, right? And which is in no way to make you say whether or not you are the best coach in the world. I'm biased. Ross is the best coach.
Yeah.
Don't write letters. We will deny it. But
and Sam, can I just stop for a second? I can't remember who it was. It was Sterling Moss or Fangio or something like that said something along the lines of, as a driver, you must drive like you're the best in the world, but never believe you are. Yeah. Something like along those lines of, right. If you ever get to the point where you're going, I'm the best, you're going to stop improving.
Okay. So taking that and pulling that apart, how did you go about defining what that meant? How did you go about defining what to aim for? And how, because even at this point, they're still, being a racing and performance coach is a relatively small demographic. That's in terms of the number of people that are alive currently on planet Earth versus the number of people who are alive currently on planet Earth and coaching racing drivers, performance people. That's different. That's a very, very small fraction. So how did you go about defining what best meant? What does that look like?
Well, for starters, I look back at who are the best coaches that I have seen. And, I've already talked about some of those. And then there was a lot of, I don't know why. I guess it's because I'm not very smart. I ask a lot of questions. And one of the questions that I asked myself was, what would I have wanted? What would have helped me? And so I started applying that to drivers that I was working with. And then learning that driver needs something different over here, and that driver needs something different over here. So the adapting piece. And then I often refer to drivers that I coach, and some drivers more than others, as my lab rats. They're people that I tried things with. And fortunately, I'm going to say that most, I don't know what the number is, 98% or 90% or whatever of the things that I tried, they worked. And when they didn't work, I would ask myself, why didn't that work? And sometimes it was as simple as, well, it didn't work for that driver because what they need is something different. But I would then try it with somebody else and it would work there. So I guess I would just started creating this database of what works and what doesn't work. And, when you grow up in the sport, going to racetracks since you were 5 or 6 years old, you see things and you see patterns and trends, and you start to go, I guess you start making better educated guesses.
Can you give me an example of a time when it worked and a time when it didn't? Because and what it felt like when that light bulb clicked, right? What was it like?
So here's a good example of that. I was coaching a father and a son who were relatively new to racing. They had raced some open wheel cars and club racing. Somebody contacted me and said, hey, would you come and coach these guys because they're committed to becoming better, but they don't really have a path. So I started coaching the father and the son. And it was this was a big learning lesson. And I'd read things about learning styles and all this kind of stuff because I'm a learning junkie. Like I said, I like taking things apart and figuring out how they work. And one of the things that I'd figured out was that people tend to learn in different ways. And I learned that the father, I could draw something on a piece of paper. I could even take a data trace of a throttle trace and a brake trace, and I could draw it and then say, go do that. Like, draw that brake trace with your foot on the track. And I could see him kind of visualizing that and go on the track, and he would do it. If I did the exact same thing with the sun, it was like I was staring at a blank wall.
Really?
Like, it meant nothing to him. So I would go, hey, here's what I want you to do. I want you to come into the corner and just think about like coming off the brake pedal. And it's kind of like you're, wow, like this. And I'd make these sounds and he would go and do it. And I went, wow, here's a kid and his dad, obviously related. And yet how they took in this information and how they used it were so different that that was I'm going to say that was one of the key learning points in my life as a coach, where I just went, okay, I can't talk to every driver the exact same way. I have to figure out if I want 3 drivers or 10 drivers to do the exact same thing, I probably have to learn how to say those things in 10 different ways.
That can't have been the first time that something didn't work, right? What did it feel like in the times prior when you kind of run up against that wall and you couldn't help somebody and you didn't know how to kind of tune the dials and faders of how you related to them and worked with them? What did that feel like? I mean, besides the obvious answer, which is frustrating, right?
Okay, yeah, frustrated. I am naturally a very impatient person, but as a coach,
wait, seriously?
Yeah,
I'm not being sarcastic.
Can we move on?
I'm not being sarcastic. I never would have known. Go on. Sorry. Yeah.
But I've learned how to adapt as a coach. I mean, as a coach, you have to be prepared to be patient. And yes, times where you got to go, time to go, guy. Like we don't have time to be patient here. But as a coach, you do have to learn to be patient at times. And so. First part is frustration. I remember working with a young kid in an open wheel car on an oval track who would not let the car track out towards the wall. Hey, first time you drive on an oval track in an open wheel car, you're aware of those big, hard concrete walls on the outside out there.
Right.
And natural human instinct is stay away from them. So you keep some wheel in, and guess what? By going back to power and keeping some wheel turned in, you're more likely to actually meet the wall. So getting that driver to unwind the wheel and let the car run free. One of the things on an oval track is it's all about momentum and letting the car, like I remember that was a phrase that always stuck with me, is let the car run free, let it go. And the only way to do that is to unwind and straighten the wheel. And I remember getting very frustrated with this driver, and trying multiple different ways because again, there's sort of some great quote. I think it's some Zen quote, something about, there's always a way in. And that's kind of how I think about drivers is if I've explained something 10 different ways and the driver isn't doing it, that's not the driver's fault. It's up to me. It's my responsibility. In fact, and Sam, because this is, I gotta get on my soapbox here. And there are some
Bentley soapbox. Do the soapbox. Do the soapbox.
There are some instructors / coaches out there who have uttered the phrase OSB.
Other sports beckon.
Yes.
Right.
They'll look at a driver and go, this driver is never going to make it. So other sport beckons, go away kind of thing. I think that is the most rude, stupid, ignorant thing that anybody could ever think, because there is not a person in the world who cannot improve as a driver. I'm not going to say that I can take every driver and turn them into Max Verstappen, but I can make every driver improve. And that's my goal as a driver, or as a driver coach, is to help that driver improve. And therefore, it's up to me to find the way in to do that.
Okay, so let's go back for a second. So the guy who wouldn't let the car run out all the way, the guy who was holding the car tight in the oval, I'm really curious, because a lot of what's interesting, and I catch myself doing this too when somebody's trying to help me learn something, which is often, right? So much of our interactions that say something about us can be pulled down to how we react when someone else sees something we're not doing right. What did he say to you? What did he do when you said, "Oh, hey, try this"? Was it, and this is in no way to disparage that particular person, right? But was it excuses? Was it really complicated reasons? Was it, "Oh, I am," and just complete denial of the situation? What did that feel like? What was he what was he giving back when you put that out there?
Well, let me turn it around in terms of what I was saying and thinking. My first thought was, he's afraid. He's scared. There's fear there. And understandably so. I've driven on oval tracks. Those concrete walls can scare you. So it wasn't like me going, "Oh, what a wimp," or anything like that. No, it's like, hey, that's a human driving the car. And this is an interesting one. So I'll share this because it was another big aha learning moment for me as a coach. Was I was very big into visualization, have been since long story, but as a playing tennis in high school, found some stuff about visualization. And, I've always used visualization to help me improve. So I thought, this driver just needs to sit and visualize coming out of the corners, unwinding or straightening the steering wheel, letting the car come out to within a foot of the wall. We went into the trailer. I had him sit down. I had him close his eyes, relax, imagine driving the car on the track and unwind the wheel, and had him do that for like 20 minutes. Boom, 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 boom. Around the track he would go. We went back on the track. Boom. Still 4 or 5 feet away from the wall. I'm going, what's going on? Like, we built the mental program for him to do this, but he's still not doing it. What am I missing here? And I remember, because on an oval track, a small oval track like this, I'm sitting up high above the grandstands looking down, and I'm on the radio to him, and I'm on the radio saying, unwind the wheel, let the car run free, get closer to the wall, let it go, like all of this stuff. And nothing, he didn't respond to any of it. So we went back into the trailer, and I'm like, where do you want to be? I want to be within a foot of the wall. Where are you now? Well, I don't know. I think I'm getting close. I'm like, okay, here's what we're going to do. I want you to go back on the track. And as you come out of the corner, I just want you to tell me on the radio, get on the radio on the straightaway and just say 1 foot, 4 feet, 12 feet, whatever it is. You tell me how close you are to the wall. And I'm standing up above my spotter, standing up above the grandstand. I'm looking down. The driver comes out the first lap and he goes 5 feet. And next time around, he goes 4 feet. Next lap, he comes around 2 feet. Next lap, 1 foot. And he was there. And really? I'm like,
Wait, why? What was it about that was the key?
He was missing that awareness. He wasn't aware of where he was in relationship to where he wanted to be. And
oh my God, so say us all, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, and think about it, Sam. The number of times you've driven on a road course, and you come out of a corner, and you're thinking, I want to use up all the track. You want to use up all the track, and then somebody comes over afterwards and shows you a video or a photo of you, and your tires are like 6 inches away from the outside curbing, and you thought you were there, but you weren't there, and this was one of the great learning moments as a coach for me. I remember sitting on the airplane, going home and really thinking about this. And as I often do, writing about it because it helps me get my ideas down and figured out. And I remember going, if somebody has a mental image of what it is they're trying to achieve, what their goal is, and they have an awareness of where they are right now in relationship to that, your brain goes, bring them together. And therefore you get to your goal. And that's when I went, MI plus A equals G. And it was one of those things I remember writing down and going, I called it my learning formula. And I've written about it a number of times. And it's one of those great, wow. And I'm going to say I've talked to people about this in so many different areas, and everybody goes, that makes some sense. Like, hey, it's like a business. The mental image is sort of like your long-term strategic plan. Your awareness is like your metrics, your weekly, monthly, quarterly financial statements that tell you how well you're doing in terms of getting there. But if a business only has that long-term plan with no short-term metrics, they're never going to get there. If all they have is these short-term metrics, but no long-term plan, they're going to stumble around in the dark until who knows where they're going to end up. But when you have the two of those things together, we learn more. And I'm going to say it's one of the most natural forms of human learning there is. When you have a very, very, very clear picture of what it is you're trying to achieve and an awareness of where you are right now in relationship to that, it's much easier to bring those two things together. And that was wow, this was massive for me.
Oh, okay. So tying that into the larger arc. So, we've talked before about how pro drivers, as a really an athlete at the peak of anything, but as a pro driver in particular, you have to be selfish with your career, with what benefits you, with how you work. I mean, you can't be a complete and total jerk, although actually I take that back. I know a bunch of complete and total jerk pro drivers, but you can't really be a total jerk and get away with it for long. But that selfishness is part of it. And yet, you mentioned once that as a coach, you have to be unselfish. So how that that transition couldn't have been easy, and that plan to get there couldn't have been something like you had to have a plan, because it couldn't have been something where you just wake up one day and go, I'm not going to be selfish Ross in the car anymore. I'm going to be unselfish Ross on the wall with a headset on. Like, how did that work? What was that like?
You nailed it. As to be a pro race driver, the world revolves around you. And, it's pretty easy to sit back and watch, Max Verstappen or Lewis Hamilton or whoever and go, yeah, that's the way they think. And you could say, no, that's a terrible way to be a human, right? No, that's just what it takes. And that's no different than any other athlete in any other sport. Perhaps some could argue that, would Steve Jobs have done what he did with Apple if he wasn't selfish? Good or bad? And, so I believe you can be selfish in a nicer way than some people do. But yes, when I was a driver, everything was about me and my driving. As a coach, you absolutely must flip that around. And I'm going to say, and I don't want to, I don't want to poke at anybody. I don't want to insult anybody, but I'm going to say that there are some underemployed race drivers who they will never become a real professional coach until they make that switch. Some have a difficult time making that switch and maybe never do. And there's nothing wrong with that. But to say that you're going to be the best professional coach, you have to make that flip. And one of the things that I learned through a lot of the mental game training that I was doing was how to change my programming. Not only am I an impatient person, and sometimes needed to dial up my patience level. I'm the world's biggest introvert, but needed to dial up that extroversion scale a little bit. So I learned how to kind of adapt my personality, my behavioral traits. And I'm going to say that there were times I could be at the track where I'm driving and and I have a co-driver that I'm coaching. When I'm in the car as a driver, it's about me. And whatever you want to call that selfish, selfish trait, I could dial it up and go, it's all about me right now. I get out of the car and it was like, okay, turn that right down. Now it's all about my co-driver and I'm going to coach that person. So I learned how to change that and adapt that. And I don't think I could be doing what I'm doing right now if I didn't learn to do that.
But how? What was that process like? How did you? Because famously, athletes. The whole thing is that we've talked about this on the show before. The notion that flow state or the zone or whatever you want to call it is something that the people at the peak of achievement can flip a switch and just get into. But deciding that you're going to be able to flip a switch between being extremely selfish in a high pressure environment and then literally a minute later turning that off and focusing somewhere else on everything but you. That's a big leap. how did you teach yourself to do that? I mean, unless, I mean, are you, did it really just happen? Like you were able to just make the choice? There's nothing wrong with that if it did, but
No, it was a deliberate thing. And going way back to when I was like 15, 16, reading an article in an athletic journal magazine about athletes using visualization. And then through the years, learning more and more, reading tons of books about sports psychology and things about really, I always say we do what we do because we're programmed to do so. We don't do what we want sometimes because we don't have the right programming yet. So I needed to change my mental programming. How I did that was through a deliberate process of doing mental imagery. I would spend time at various parts of my career at night, closing my eyes, putting myself in a relaxed state and thinking, here I am as a driver, all about me, impatient, go, 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 like just push, push, push. And then out of the car, turn that back, and I would build in a trigger, and it would go, and I would just go coach mode. And coach mode was, okay, it's got to be more patient. You have to think about adapting. You have to be more around, being unselfish, focusing on that other person, and making that a very deliberate switch. And so I built my mental programming to do that in a very deliberate way. And, it didn't happen overnight. It happened over a long period of time. But like any, think about it as a mental program, is think about it as a habit. We don't develop a habit or get rid of a habit in a day, right? It's doing something over and over and over and over again, and then it becomes a habit or a mental program. So I spend a lot of the time, and then having the advantage of these lab rats, drivers,
right.
that I worked with, that I could go, I'm gonna try this, and there's nothing like trying something, it working, to reinforce, that program works. I'm going to keep using that one. So ultimately it was a big, huge learning process for me. And, again, going back to this learning formula of I had a mental image of what a coach was and what a driver was. I had an awareness of where I was. And if I was in coach mode, but I was aware that I was in a selfish mode, or a selfish traits, or impatient. It's like, okay, yes, I need to change that. I need to change my behavior there. Or if it was the other way around, I was a driver and I was like being too impatient and, after you. Well, that's not going to work as a race driver. So
even even learning to recognize that, like a lot of times I don't realize that I'm being a selfish jerk. Like I'm a married person, right? Like that's what happens to married people. I don't realize that I'm being a selfish jerk until sometimes hours or a day or two later. In some cases, because I'm a giant cement block, I don't realize it for months. Like how, even just the fact, like there's so much to unpack there. The notion that you had to teach yourself how to recognize it and then teach yourself how to flip the switch. It's really interesting to me because we tend to beat ourselves up so often because we can't simply act a certain way. And one of the things you and Jeff have taught me just in the short time we've been doing this show is just the notion that everything is a choice, and the notion that the programming that you have it's just what's there. It doesn't mean it can't be replaced, but the fact that it takes work and choice and effort to get from A to B. You're not just going to wake up one day. You're not even just going to say, well, I need to be, kinder and less selfish in these moments. And then it happens. The fact that it's over and over and over a long process. That's remarkable.
I think the awareness thing, I don't know, there's the whole nature versus nurture thing.
Yeah.
How much is a person born with versus what they've learned through their environment? I can't say that I was born with X amount of awareness. I don't think nobody can, right?
I was born with negative 5X, and we'll just never talk about that again, but that's fine. Yeah. No.
But, through a lot of sports, I think one of the things that we learn through sports is we learn awareness. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. But, even going back to the basketball court, I was the guy that wanted to be I wanted to be the Magic Johnson. If anybody's listened to the show about, maybe, hopefully you know a little bit about basketball. Magic Johnson was that guy that could pass a ball to somebody behind his back and knew that the guy was there. And people are like, he's got eyes in the back of his head. That's the way I wanted to be on a basketball court. I wanted to be more aware. I find myself, I go hiking like I did recently, and I can be walking along a trail with a friend and I can go, oh, look at that over there. And they're like, oh, I didn't see that. Like I practice that when during the years of really trying to develop my driving abilities, I would drive down the road and play a game of how many things can I be aware of? Like I just wanted to have this, I wanted to drive down the road and go,
most people,
if you covered my mirrors, if you covered my mirrors, I still knew there was a car there. Like I like that whole, I like that feeling of being aware. And so I'm going to say that whatever I was born with, I have deliberately practiced being more aware of things. And you know, that's helped me as a coach as well, where, you know, I can stand in a corner and I can see 3 cars go through a corner and say, that one's 1 mile an hour faster than the other 2. And, you know, you look at data afterwards and you're like, yeah, you were off. It was 1.1 miles an hour. Like, and I was not born with that. But if you do something long enough, you know, if you're stubborn and stupid enough to go, I'm just going to stare at cars all day long, you know, like eventually you learn something from that. So it's all deliberate, right? In the process of, I want to be the best that I possibly can at this. I've approached it in a very deliberate way.
So I think we ought to close this with the one thing we don't talk about this very much on this show, mainly because it seems like the obvious thing to talk about, and we don't want to embarrass anybody or focus too much on it just because it's in the wheelhouse. But those who don't know, Jeff Brown, our third co-host, his son, Colin, who is mid-30s, I guess. He's 35, 36-ish, somewhere around there.
Yep.
Is an extremely successful sports car racing driver. Championship winning, Daytona winner, drives prototypes, and is one of the more talented pros to come through the sport in the past, basically in my lifetime. I don't think that's an exaggeration to say. And just happens to be Jeff's son. And I'm sure that's not at all connected to the fact that Jeff is deeply successful and very attractive and smart, like we talked earlier. And it's very good he's not here. I feel better about myself. But so you've known Colin since he was very, very young. And one of the things that comes up when we talk about how people learn, you've coached him since he was very, very young. One of the things we talk about when we talk about how people learn is how much you learn from coaching Colin, in as much as, you know, I'm sure Colin learned from having you coach him. How did that, you mentioned once that actually did change how that guy thought when he was younger, 5, 8, 10, whatever it was. You mentioned once that changed how you thought about coaching. What did that do? This was 20 years ago-ish, 25, I guess. When did you first start? What year? Do you remember?
Jeff recently sent us that little video of the very first day that Jeff and I worked together. And then at the very end of it, it pans over and there's Colin and his brother Travis standing there, and Colin was 5 or 6 or something like that.
Which, by the way, it looked like the paddock at Daytona, right? Somewhere like that?
Yes, I think that was, actually our first day that we ever worked together was actually at Phoenix. We went testing at Phoenix on the road course in the oval there. So I think that's where it was. So
there's a prototype, and then there's 2 little kids in the back of it, both of whom are like, you know, knee high, just kind of being like, poke, Dad's busy. I don't know. And then the camera pans back over again. It was Jeff's wife holding the camera, right?
Yeah.
It's just this working race paddock. It's just, and then their kids being like, poke, off in the corner. I don't know. Brother, stop hitting me. Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. And then, was doing actually Ron Langford and I were doing a Inner Speed Secrets workshop, a 2-day program. And Colin was 12, was kind of his last full season of karting. I'd already, you know, gone to Europe and Japan and stuff like that, I think, at that point to race karts. And I remember Jeff saying, you know, do you think this would be appropriate for Colin? And I'm kind of thinking, you know, 2 days of, you know, some old guys yabbering along about all sorts of different things.
Right.
Could they stay focused? Well, Colin and his brother Travis attended this thing, and they were the most attentive people in the entire group. They were asking great questions. They were just like little sponges. And so that's the very first time that I really worked with Colin. And then very shortly after that, the transition began to start getting Colin driving cars. And first time was in a Formula Renault, coaching him. And so spent a few years there coaching him in the Formula Renault open wheel cars. And then, somewhat famously for Colin and a couple other guys is that Team 16 thing when at 16 years old, Colin, Brad Coleman and Adrian Cario co-drove Porsche at the Daytona 24-hour race. And I got to co-drive with them and coach them. So, I've been working with Colin since he's been 12, 13 in that range. And yeah, honestly, I say that I have learned as much from Colin as Colin has from me. It's been...
How? What does that mean?
Well, first off, Colin was a blank sheet with just an open mind. And, first of all, Jeff, I could do anything with Colin and Jeff would go, yes, let's do it. Like,
we're going to hang him from a tree by his toes, then we're going to throw oranges at him and see how he flinches. Yeah,
we would go to a track and I'd go, let's take the front wings off the car and have him learn how to adapt to that. And he would drive tons of miles in that. And then be like, remove the rear flap off the rear wing and do the same thing. Now, and obviously Jeff knowing the car and everything, we could do stuff pretty radical, but not super dangerous. I didn't say not dangerous, but I just said not super dangerous.
Super dangerous. I mean, it's only your children. It's fine.
Yeah.
What's compelling about that, I think, is that, I actually, when I saw Jeff this weekend, we were talking about Colin and sports car racing and a handful of other things. Colin came up briefly and he mentioned that, it's, the great larger truth that everybody knows about professional motorsport and motorsport in general is that talent doesn't get you to the top, right? It's talent plus other things and other things and other things. And then this one giant thing. And then that one giant thing is always money. And Jeff, made the point that the work that Colin was willing to put in and the effort that he was willing to put in was the only thing that made the difference, because they had funding to basically get him through the end of karting. And then he said a season in a single seater, and that was it. Yeah. And everything past that hung on what he put into it. So what was he willing to put into it that made you, how did you have to adapt how you thought and taught and observed in response to what he gave?
What was he willing to put in? Everything.
How did that change you?
It pushed me to work harder. And so I got it. Colin is, like I said, I mean, I've learned so much from him, and, he was young enough that he was still very adaptable. Like, you work with a driver that's been doing the same thing for many years, and it's harder to change that programming. He was so young and moldable. Part of it was because his head wasn't full of, oh, you must do it this way. Very growth mindset kind of a kid because of his parents.
I was gonna say, it's a very Jeff Brown kind of thing, really.
Yeah. But also, I knew that if I suggested this, I said, go and try this. He'd come back and go, well, I tried it 10 times, and now what do you want me to do? So he was willing to experiment and try things, and even through the years, even when it got past the point where I was really coaching him, there'd be times where we'd be at the track or I get a call and it's like, what do I do? What should I work on now? Like, he was constantly wanting to get better. And there was a certain part of the way he drove that I questioned. This was maybe 5-6 years ago.
Recently?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. And, we sat down, we talked about it, and I said, I'd like you to go and try something different. And I don't remember exactly, but mostly what came out of it was I was wrong. what Colin was doing worked better for him. But I knew that it wasn't like I tried it once, it didn't work, so I'm going back to my old ways. I knew that Colin put the effort in to try this over and over and try to make it work. And he just says, I just can't make that work the way you want it to.
Do you remember what it was?
Yeah. I'll save that for another conversation.
Okay, right.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's now I think there was a little bit of, I can't make that work. So essentially I'm wrong, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Is what he's saying. You're wrong. But there was also a little bit because he's calling going, but in learning to try and do that, I learned some other things. So it wasn't a waste of time. And to kind of move away from Colin just for a second, the only other driver that I've had through the years, every driver I've ever worked with are amazing. But
I love all my children equally, except that one. That one's not equal. He's less.
Yeah. The only other driver that comes close to, that's puts in the effort that Colin does is Stephen Thomas, the gentleman driver that I've been working with for the past 5 years. And
Stephen's the one who had not seen a race, hadn't set foot on a racetrack, and 4 years later, 4, 5, 3, won Le Mans and a prototype. Was that it?
3.5 years after the very first day he drove on a racetrack, won Le Mans in LMP2 Pro-Am class.
Right.
And at Le Mans with 3 drivers, you have 2 pros and 1 Am. And more so at Le Mans with that Pro-Am class, the Am makes a difference. It's not like...
It's just time in car, right?
Because of the time, but you don't have the way, in an IMSA race, an Am driver can be a lap down and the safety car comes out, you get a wave around, and all of a sudden you're back there and your pro's, 10 seconds back from the lead. Yeah. That doesn't happen at Le Mans. And at Le Mans, he drove fast and never made a mistake. And I will say, 3.5 years in, there were a couple other Am drivers who were a little quicker than he was, but they all made mistakes. And Stephen won Le Mans. It wasn't like his pro drivers won Le Mans. Stephen won Le Mans. And the biggest thing with Stephen is he will take what I've suggested and put a plan together, and he'll work it to death.
How do the two of them challenge you in the same way? Because you once told me, right after I met you years and years ago, this might have been even 9-10 years ago, you said something about how one of the interesting things about Colin was that there came a point in your career with coaching him where you had to stop and go, hell, what do we work on now? And you found it because you're you and you're very good at what you do. But the fact that if that's the way Stephen worked and that's the way Colin worked, what else do they have in common and how they make you think and challenge you?
The main thing is just that is you don't get to a point, you can't stay in your comfort zone as a coach and go, well, this always works with drivers. No, You're constantly with Colin, it's we're not looking for seconds. We're not looking for half a second. We're not looking for tenths of it. We're looking for hundredths and thousandths of a second. And it's the most subtle little thing. And, with some drivers, that's a technique thing. Another driver might be a mindset, state of mind kind of a thing. Another one might be, hey, you're not making the right decisions, so we got to work on the decision making. Other ones, it's more around, racecraft and positioning and thinking strategically, or being more patient or impatient. So there's all of those things. With Stephen, he pushed me same kind of thing in terms of the effort. I jokingly or laughingly tell the story of one of the rare weekends that I was at home, and Stephen and I do a lot of work with a simulator remotely. He can be in his simulator at his home. I can be watching at home looking at telemetry and everything. I'm literally sitting in the car with him. And so we do a lot of that work. And then, I will then give him some homework. And we're home and it's a Sunday morning. I get up and it's 7:00 on a Sunday morning. And I look at my phone and my wife says, how many? And I go, 7. There are 7 text messages from Stephen this morning saying, I've done this. What else do you want me to do now? And it's I've had a lot of drivers through the years, young, old, gentlemen, pro drivers, whatever, say, I want to be the best in the world, but not put that last little bit of effort in. And, you know, and Colin and Stephen are definitely there. There are some other ones as well. The other thing that Stephen pushed me on was, early in my career as a driver, it was like, I got to win, I got to beat them, I got to beat the other drivers. It's all about the competition. And one of the things that I learned from reading a couple of key books that really made a big impact on me in my life, but then experiencing it, is when I focus on the result, that lap time, I'm going to try to get that lap time. I didn't go as fast. Well, I gotta beat you. I gotta beat Sam. I didn't beat Sam. When I focused on...
When did this happen? This sounds amazing. We should totally go back and talk about it all the time.
Okay, let's talk about it some more. When I focused on me, when I focused on my performance, when I was like, okay, I want to be a little smoother here. I want to think further ahead. I want to think more strategically. I want to be a little more patient here. I want to be more impatient here. When I started focusing on me, my performance improved. And guess what? I went faster and I won more races. So that was a big shift in my thinking as a driver. So it's one of the things that I've coached a lot of drivers on. And most drivers, that helps. I mean, a lot of drivers, if they just turned their in-car lap timers off, they would go faster. Steven comes along, and I had to shift because we'd talked about it. We'd tried that. And you know what? I would dangle a lap time in front of him and say, just go get it. And he would. And 9 times out of 10 with other drivers, I'd say, dangle that lap time with them and the car would come back on the hook, right? So Steven changed and pushed me in other areas that way. And, I'm going to say that even in the 5 years or 5.5 years now that we've been working together, we've sort of gone from we need to go this direction. Now we need to come back to this a different way. Now we're going to need to go this way. So like it's never static, but he's pushed me in my thinking and philosophy of how to perform at your best as well.
I think that's rad though. And it ties back into something we talk about here a lot, right? The notion that, if you focus on the destination, you might get there and you might, wrap the car around a tree on the way there. And if you focus on the path and what you're doing and how you're doing it, the destination just kind of ends up working out. And that's just a massive lesson in there that it's just so hard to remember every single day. But it's one more piece of putting in that work. It's just really, really cool that's kind of the underpinning thread in your career. And unfortunately, on that note, we're about out of time. Is there anything else in all of this that you want to, we could talk again about that one time that I beat you that apparently happened that I don't remember. We could also talk about the time that I beat you. We could talk about so much stuff, Ross. What should we talk about when I beat you? I'm sorry, what? We should end the show, shouldn't we? We don't have any stories except the one about where I beat you.
So 2 things. There was that time when you beat me.
Oh,
and
I'm
to the day I die, I'm going to be thinking about that day. And
I was exceptional that day. It was amazing.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But the other thing is that I got to say, when you suggested this show, I was like, ugh. I hate talking about anything like about me.
Same.
And I hope that I didn't talk about me, but I talked about the process, because it's actually been kind of fun just to force myself to reflect back and think on this stuff. And
of course.
I think I think the lesson here is that I need to do more of that, because I learn more by doing that. If that makes sense. And
the real friends
at the end of the day,
were the talking about ourselves along the way is no. I hate talking about myself, Ross. I know the feeling.
So it was again. It wasn't about me. It was about the things that happened and the people that I got to work with. I learned more. And if there was only one thing that I could do more of, it would be just learn more.
That is I don't know. That's the best way to close out this show that I think we've blindly stumbled into yet.
We're just learning.
Yeah, right. As always, thank you for listening. I want to. We're a couple of weeks out because of our tape schedule, but I want to thank especially everybody I met at VIR. So I was in the paddock for 2 days, and I showed up with a handful of stickers, a stack of stickers that I thought I would never get rid of, and I'd have to start slapping them on, like, I don't know, random stray animals and telephone poles and things like that. But I met so many people who had so many nice things to say about the show or asked about stickers, and were just so complimentary. It was a deep pleasure. Thank you so much for finding me, finding Jeff, and saying hi and taking the time to let us know that you like the show and you're listening. We really do appreciate it, and we feel really lucky to be able to do this.
And Sam, I think it was fantastic that you got to experience what Jeff and I have experienced being at the track, when people just come up and talk to us. And so anybody listening, please keep coming up to us and talking to us about even the things you don't like. It's all about learning.
Maybe most of those things that you don't like should be about Jeff, because I've yet to find a flaw in the man, and I need to feel better about myself.
Yeah.
On that note, I'm going to read us out. Ross, may I read us out?
Please.
Okay. It's Not the Car is produced by us. I'm the show's creator. Mike Perlman is our executive producer, and he lives in the San Francisco Bay Area, where I lived once long ago, and where I still wake up in the middle of the night every so often thinking about this one banh mi sandwich joint in this little hole in the wall in the financial district. It's called Saigon Sandwich. And the point here is that place was delicious, and the bread was fresh but crusty and incredible. And if I had to figure out a way to describe Mike, that'd be it. He's delicious and crusty and incredible and fresh. For more on bonus content, perks, and future live events, you can subscribe to our free news feed. It's at patreon.com/notthecar. That option's little 3 dots on the upper right side of the screen on our Patreon page. And if you'd like this episode and you'd like to support what we do here, check out that same Patreon link and click Become a Member. So this is new, we just added this, anyone who becomes a member automatically gets a free live pony in the mail or your very own Le Mans prototype. You can choose. Personally, I'd take the pony. You don't want to know what it costs to keep an LMP car on the road. Don't ask how we can do this. We just can. Also, side note, there are really cool things like merch discounts, our merch store. Our merch store, does it exist? I don't know. Maybe check it out. There are really cool things like merch discounts and exclusive bonus content, a whole lot of other neat stuff, plus random posts and writing from me on Patreon. If you're enjoying the show, please share it with anyone you think might also enjoy it. When you share it, it really does make a huge difference, and it really does help us keep It's Not the Car on the air. As always, thank you for listening.
Keep learning, keep having fun.
Have fun.